We've all heard the statement, if it wasn't for people, work would be easy. Wouldn't it be great to see people as the solution and not the problem? Today we're going to continue exploring the topic of bridging cultures and share wisdom on the lenses we see the world through and how to dance with the 12 dimensions of culture. I am Nuala.
And I am Karen, and we are the Safety Collaborators.
Our mission is to help people have better conversations and change the way they think about safety. Consider us your thinking partners, sharing expertise and wisdom in everything safety, safety culture, and psychological safety.
In the last episode, we chatted about the 3 Colours of Worldviews, which broadly looks at our personal cultural preferences through a mixture of 3 lenses or drivers. As a reminder, and for someone who might be listening to this for the first time, these 3 drivers are honour shame, which means doing that which brings honour or not, innocent guilt, so doing the right thing or not, and power fear, so doing that which brings control, power and influence for good or not. Loosely, every single person on the planet has a mix of these 3 world drivers. Well, this is the assessment that we make with our individual preferences. And those drivers are brought to us through how we were educated, what country we lived in, what our family situation was like, who were the people who were our mentors as we grow up. You know, all of these things colour who we are. So, for an example, I was born in Australia to German parents. So I actually have I have a strong innocent guilt mix, but I also have quite a bit of honour shame as well. I can remember, being told, no, we don't air our dirty laundry, right? That stays in the family type stuff. So those sorts of comments can colour how we see the world. And the reason we use the word 3 colours, the 3 colours of worldview, is because if you put the 3 primaries together and mix them all up, you get something like 18 million different colours, or you brought the word to it, the kaleidoscope of colour.
And what's really helpful is understanding that kaleidoscope of colour through the reference of the 3 colours of worldview. It helps us adjust ourselves. It's not about changing who we are, but it's about learning and growing and enhancing our wisdom and cultural agility so that when we're working with others, we can understand where they're coming from and why we might be seeing the world from a different view, a different lens, why we have different drivers.
Yeah.
And the 3 questions that are the litmus test to reflect the primary drivers of worldview are really helpful. And those are, does my action bring honour to those involved or does it bring them shame? Is it the right thing to do? Does it do justice to all of those involved? And is it empowering and life-giving? And does it diminish fear or does it instill and increase fear? And we did a lovely deeper dive into those in episode 59.
We did.
And if you haven't listened, I seriously suggest you go back and have a listen or go to the show notes on safetycollaborations.com/podcast.
So today we wanted to expand more on that because, there are so many elements to how we work together as teams or how we lead teams, how we work with our co-workers. And the truth is we're all different. And as you often say, we're different, not necessarily difficult. But we may perceive that other person as being difficult, when in fact they just come at it from a different perspective, either their own global perspective, which is the 3 colours of worldview, or a more dimensional perspective. And an example of that would be how we prefer to communicate. What constitutes a work relationship? We're going to talk through some of these dimensions in a minute. We talk about them as polarities at times. So do we like sharing or do we not like sharing? As a simple, easy, understandable example.
And I think we've mentioned it a few times, is that when we look at a group of culturally diverse workforce or engagement, there might be, let's say, 15 nationalities and a workforce or a project team of 120 people. So it's not just 15 potential different colours of worldview, but it's also 120 personalities that come into that.
Yep.
Because that adds a whole different level of complexity and layer and a different dimension to the conversation.
Well, interestingly, in the work that I've done on this with Knowledge Works, which is the Marco Blankenburg, where I first discovered these tools, in fact, one of the big other tools that they use is actually the disc. We do use disc. We also use e-colours. We have a couple of different ones because it is an important part of the bigger picture. And what's really important for everyone to understand is none of this is about labelling. It's about understanding self
and others.
And others, exactly. And how do we get through a day with the most success, whether that's drilling a well or having a family dinner. Right.
Exactly. Yes. Or even away and staying with family at the moment. And I always used to love it. My mother-in-law these days, but we're very good friends. She always used to describe that, you only stay with family for 3 days because after that they're like fish, they start to smell. And a lot of that is because, you bring in all sorts of different things. But sometimes it's just even having to understand that even if you were from the same family, you see the world differently and you do different things. I'm an incredibly out there, extroverted, loud personality in many instances. But I'm staying with family who are a little more introverted, a little quieter, and I need to know that I have to give them time to rejuvenate and energize because otherwise they're going to find me exhausting whilst I'm here. And not being offended if one of them goes and disappears off into their room or their office for a couple of hours because they need time. I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't said anything wrong. It's about that understanding. Whereas 10, 15 years ago, I probably would have been like, well, what did I do? Did I say something? Like, what's wrong? Why have you just disappeared for 2 hours? Whereas that understanding is fabulous. I'll check in with you later. Can I bring you tea? And it works in work as well.
But very much so. And we call this cultural agility. And so when we talk about this, it's not about just nationality or what people eat or don't eat or dress or don't dress. That's part of the story because it becomes part of an individual's norms, cultural norms, ethnicity, those sorts of things. But these tools that we're talking about here, what's really lovely about them, and I guess why I really like them, is the Three Colours of Worldview applies to everybody to some degree. It helps us to understand that my view is not the only view, and that's the critical piece.
That is so key.
Yeah, and then the 12 dimensions in some ways help us dive a little bit deeper into that. So we're going to actually go through those 12 dimensions in a minute. And the point of this is not to give you an in-depth story about each one, but just to give you a context of what those 12 dimensions are. And they help us map that cultural diversity a little bit more and at a more personal level. And the idea behind it is, once you get to learn and understand these, and we measure this as well, so we actually have tools to measure both of these, measurement tools, to help you start that conversation. The program that we run is called Bridging Cultures for Safety. And if we want to use this, if you've got a diverse workforce, then this is a great tool to start understanding, right, we've got a lot of different people here. Let's help each other understand how to get the best out of each other. And it is a self-analysis, I suppose, as well. So you can do this for yourself and can do it for teams. And it works really, the group report is really fascinating to look at because when we're in a team and, everybody talks about team development, we've all got to think the same. And no, and we are not the same. And it's that diversity that gives us the strength in many ways to do what we need to do.
And that's so critical. So, shall we dive into the 12 dimensions?
Very quickly from the top to bottom, there's 12 of them. There's growth, relationship, outlook, destiny, context, connecting, expression, decision-making, planning, communication, accountability, and status. Don't expect you to remember that, and we're going to look at each one of them individually now. Before that, we'll actually also share a story about how we use this in practice. So shall we start with growth? We'll just go from the top to the bottom.
I think so. That sounds fab.
So when we talk about growth, we tend to, and we're going to look at this from a business perspective, so from a working life perspective.
Yeah.
The polarity for growth is people on one side and material on the other. So it means if we were to invest time, money, energy, whatever is required, are we more people-oriented or are we more material, systems, processes, buildings even oriented? So if we're people-oriented, it means that we place more emphasis on the impact that this decision might have or this process that we're going to go through will have on people versus I want to invest more money in this and we'll worry about the people later.
Yeah.
You know, everything is a bit situational as well, but sometimes you need to invest money into IT and buildings, etc. But then you've got this more task-oriented approach versus people-oriented approach.
The next dimension that we're going to look at is relationship, and that is, are relationships universal or situational? And if a relationship is developed in one sphere of your life, do you extend it to other spheres? So when we talk about that is, let's say you have a relationship you get on with somebody quite well at work, does that then extend into a personal relationship? Like, oh, come and meet my family, or let's go fishing on the weekend, or something like that? Or is it work is work and play is play and the two shall not mix?
And I've definitely worked with people like that. And it's funny, for me, I find that really difficult.
Oh, very.
Because I'm much more universal.
I think both of us are in that aspect.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, it's that understanding of, well, it's not that the person doesn't like you and isn't happy to work with you, but they just don't mix business and pleasure. Whereas, and other people who don't do that, find it really exhausting when people
Yes.
go, come for drinks after work, or come to the family barbecue at the picnic park, or, whatever family day it is. And they're going, I don't want to meet your family. I don't want you to meet my family. They're mine. And it's not because I don't like you, but there's a line.
Indeed.
What's next?
The next one is outlook. So do you have a more traditional outlook or a more innovative outlook? And I think that's a really interesting one for this time in our lives or human history, because there is so much going on. And we hear talk about, are we losing traditions or are we being more future thinking? When we look about work, so do we measure our organisational success, or does the company I work for, I don't mean ours, but, well, maybe we do, success is based on future opportunities or on past achievements? How many times have we sort of heard people say, well, we've always done it this way and so we've got to do it that was successful back then.
Yes.
Great. But what do we need to do to move forward? So you're going to have people who are much more focused on the history versus future. So those traditional, they're past-focused people, they talk about the history of their family and their business and whatever. And then you've got those innovators who really, that is all very nice, but not as important as wondering what's going on tomorrow. What will tomorrow bring? When do we land on Mars? I think that's a really important question, right? So it's what can we do today and tomorrow, and whether it's prospecting, potential work, having new engineering ways of doing things, new systems. Let's look at a better process or system. We've got others who are on the workforce, but that system's working. Why do you need to change it?
Or we've got history in developing that system and it's my baby. Why do you want to come in and bring in something new?
Yeah. And so these things are really interesting. You just triggered a thought then about, when we're employing people or trying to induct people into a group or a team, this is quite useful to know. So if you've got a team of people who are very much focused on what the future can bring and how we can improve operations and are always looking for that continuous improvement, but you're inviting and bringing somebody in who just terrifies them. Right? They're not comfortable there at all.
Are you setting them up for success or are you setting them up for failure?
Exactly.
The next one we're going to talk about is destiny. Are we directed? So is your environment in control of you? So it's an external locus of control. Or are you in control of your environment? So it's an internal locus of control. When we talk about a directed style, people in this seem to see themselves as guided and believe that others are in control. Whether it's from a societal perspective, this is where I fit into society and I am guided and directed, you will do this, you will be like that, this will be your destiny. Or directive, I believe I can make anything of myself. I am in control of my own destiny, and regardless of where I've come from or what I have or haven't got, I can become anything that I want to be. And being directive can be very strongly individualistic because I am determined to make myself this picture of whatever it might be. Whereas directed can be I fit into my community, I fit into my team, I will do as I am told. And we see that play out in so many ways. An example just popped to mind where one of the team on one of the projects I was on arrived a day early. And one of the managers said, how could he have arrived a day early? Why didn't he question? But he got his flight details, he got his information, he went, oh, that's interesting, they want me there a day early. Didn't question because he was directed. Whereas somebody else with a different worldview, on the other side, on directive, could have been like, oh, hang on a second, I've got family plans. Why on earth do you want me to come a day early? And we'll question and we'll speak up and say what's going on. So how do we look at I'm doing what I'm told versus possibly I'm questioning what I'm told, and then where does that balance come in to be healthy within a team where people may be on completely opposite directions?
And you may already be hearing in this through these few that we've already mentioned that there's overlap.
Yes.
All of these overlap and play together. You're not one or the other. You're somewhere on that polarity or that spectrum. And I think that one plays nicely into the next one, which is all about context. How often do we say context matters? But when we talk about context, if we look at the ends of the polarity or that line, we have informal and formal. So if we're informal, you ask yourself, do you operate with few strict rules? You don't like rules. Basically, I know that person very well, rules of behaviour, or does one really value the following protocols and having strict rules and doing as I'm told, that type of thing? So formal could be, and I think you can see it in the way people dress. I think that's a great example. I can remember in my earlier careers, I thought it was the thing to do, and I'm talking now about the 80s and 90s, right, where you had to wear a suit, and it was even women, men, if you were going to be in the corporate world, you must wear and address you people formally, and you wear a suit. I mean, I used to have matching shoes, handbags, and all that stuff.
And stockings, don't forget the stockings as a woman. I mean, pencil skirt and a stockings.
Oh, it used to kill me. So I was actually going against my grain because I'm actually not that way at all. I'm much more an informal person and always have been. Now, I think what else plays into this a little bit is what is the worldview that you live in. So if you have a strong worldview of power, fear, then you might use the titles of people because it's respectful and those sorts of things. But if you've got more innocent guilt or come from a background of Mr. Mrs., who cares? I get annoyed when people ask me, are you a Miss or a Mrs.? It's none of your business. Who cares? My name's Karen Avari.
Exactly.
Just to give you that, Now, does that mean I have to treat the rest of the world? I'm using myself as an example here quite a bit, I noticed. But does that mean I have to disrespect the other? No. If I'm going into a place where it's formal and titles are important and that a way of dress is important, then you do it.
Yes.
Because it's respectful. Yes.
So when I'm going into a host country where it is disrespectful to show my shoulders or to wear shorts, I will wear long sleeve t-shirt or a longer t-shirt or trousers or a long skirt. I will take a scarf with a headdress because I'm showing respect to my host. And that's the same as when I go into a working environment. I will be respectful to the culture and to the environment of that working space and how it works, and then get an understanding of who's who and have that agility to be able to dance and adapt myself to then be able to build rapport and relationship with those around me.
It's always about how do we get the best out of a situation.
Yes.
I mean, if you're walking into a situation that is completely different to yours and you're going, well, this is the way I am, not necessarily a good approach.
And I think that flows beautifully into connecting, which is the next one.
Yeah.
So connecting is exclusive and inclusive. Do you follow a chain of command? I will speak when I'm spoken to. I won't volunteer information unless I am asked. Or is it quite easy for you to have conversations with people, volunteer information? On the one hand, I think on the exclusive is very much defining people by what they do. What is their title? What is their education? Are they degreed? And the other side is, well, I either like you for who you are or I don't. It's got nothing to do with your title or your degree, because I will bring you into my world based on getting to know you and understand you and have free flow of communication. Whereas sometimes in the exclusion, it's a very strong sense of privacy and protocol.
Yeah. And I think also in this one, it's also in the speed in which you get to know people. So when we're inclusive, it means that we want to get to know people more deeply. We want to know more about them.
Yeah.
You know, when we're exclusive, it's really just on a sharing information on a needs to know basis.
Yes.
So it's also about how we share information across that spectrum.
Very much so.
I'm sure, you know, we've all been there. You go, God, that person just, that's a whole pile of stuff I really don't need to know. And then you've got the other people like, really, you could give me a little bit more, you know?
Yes.
So it's about finding that balance there. Which then comes into expression. So how do we express ourselves? Do we tend to reveal a lot or do we conceal? Where are our feelings? Some people are very happy to share lots about themselves. So if you have a revealing style of expressing yourself, then you are communicating very verbally and non-verbally. So you're using your whole body when you communicate. So emotions flow easily. There's not a lot of inhibition. You just let people know what's going on with you. Someone who's more concealing style, they don't necessarily want everybody to know how they're feeling.
Yeah.
And I think something else that's important here, we talk a lot of things around mental health and those sorts of things. And I think depending on, again, context in some ways, but depending on what it is and do people feel safe enough to share as well, I think is important and something else that would be contributing to this. But when we talk about these 12 dimensions, more about just how we are naturally. And not everybody likes to just blurb.
No.
Now, it could be different in a work scenario, the team versus maybe what they're like at home with their family and loved ones.
Yeah.
That may be a little different, but they tend to still fall into those categories somewhere. They may just move up and down that polarity line.
And I think that's true in every single one.
Yes, it is.
We're going to move on to decision making, and I think that is also relevant in all of these. Where do you stand on the polarity? So decision making is very much around, do rules form the basis of your decisions, or does relationship form the basis of decisions? So are decisions best dictated by rules and protocols, or do important relationships influence them greatly? And rules over relationship in business. You will have a contract before anything starts when rules are the focus.
Yeah.
So until we actually have something that is signed and legal, we will sign the contract, then the business will start. On the other side, on relationship, it's like, but we've had a handshake. We've had an agreement. We've had a conversation. We know the contract will come at some point. You know, the nitty-gritty detail will be worked out as the project kind of carries on, and that's okay. On the relationship side, so someone who comes from the polarity very strongly of rules, once we've got a contract, that is the contract. And if you are now suddenly trying to negotiate, I'm going to question your trustworthiness because we agreed everything up front. Whereas if you're on the other extreme polarity on relationships, it's something that's fluid. I'm going to trust that we're going to do what we commit to do regardless of what is written in writing. And it can be really uncomfortable for people and for environments where you can get yourself in serious hot water if you haven't done a change process or something hasn't been done correctly. Again, it's where are you on the polarity and what is actually going to be thoughtfully best for the situation at hand.
Indeed. And I think about it from our business perspective. We have both. I have to say, I think most of our business relationships are more in the relationship end of the spectrum. We do look at the legal stuff. We make sure everybody's safe and sound.
Thank God for Katrina.
Yes, definitely, because for us it's all about relationship. But what's interesting here, if you look at the worldviews, so if the person that you're dealing with comes with a very strong innocent guilt culture, they're going to be probably a little more rules-based because they're constitutionally and their legal system is a driver for that. So it is about having the rules in place, right? If we think about safety protocols around the world, the more innocent guilt the culture, they tend to have more rules and regulations around safety. The less innocent guilt the culture community, it's a little less, it's a bit more forgiving in not necessarily in a good way, but right?
Yeah.
Both can have their good and bad sides. So even when we talk about implementing a safety culture, we need rules. But for some, it's going to be really difficult.
Yep.
And for others, it'll be easy. You know, for others, it's more about the relationship. It's about the peers, their team. Well, I will follow the rules, but only if that's what the group does.
Does and expects.
Not because that's what the rules say.
You just made me think, how often do I say, I am a very good rule follower when the rules make sense?
Yes.
But I will err on relationship when the rule doesn't make sense to me.
No.
So then let's have a greater conversation, a bigger conversation.
So you think about unwritten rules.
Completely.
They're not necessarily about relationship, but it is in relation to how that team or that organisation operates.
Yes.
So it's the relationship to the organisation or to that
Well,
project.
as much as you say that, how often have we had the discussion that people will put themselves at risk in order to fit into the team?
Most definitely. Yep.
So, you know, that often that
Yep.
unwritten rule or the breaking the rules can be very relationship driven.
But it's also can make people feel very ill
Yes, absolutely.
because it's going against their grain. So let's move on to the next one.
Planning.
When you're planning something, is your day-to-day activities governed more by people or by your schedule? I really admire people that have those calendars and they stick to those goals and those things. Yeah, a little less so focused. I'm like, oh, there's a person over there I can have a chat with. And I'm not even the big chatty one in this lot. So, you know, planning, the continuum there is people versus time. So when we're people-focused, it means that we tend to do more one activity at a time. We deal with interruptions a little better. So somebody that's very focused on people will have time management issues for sure.
Oh, preaching to the choir over here.
Oh, you, right? Where we have somebody who's extreme time-focused and task-oriented, they will do one thing and they'll do it well. And interruptions can be very hard for them to deal with. It's very frustrating. Let's say we've just had a team meeting that says we're going to do X, Y, and Z in this order over this period of time. And everybody goes, okay, let's do that. And then 10 minutes later, supervisor, whoever comes along, says, sorry, we're going to change
Change
that.
of plans.
So the person that just said, oh my God, I just had this all planned out in my head. This is the time frames it's going to do in.
And that's just thrown me completely for a six.
Exactly. The people-oriented person's going to, oh well, poop happens. Let's go.
And you see that in different, not just in different cultures, but within different countries. And I love it
Yes.
because, you know, we have Johannesburg and we have Cape Town. So Johannesburg, you say, come for dinner at 7. You arrive for dinner at 7 and the hostess meets you at the door, the host or what have you, and, you know, welcome drinks are ready. You arrive for 7 o'clock when you've been invited at 7 o'clock in Cape Town, and they're like, why are you early? You know, the hostess is still putting her makeup on, stuff hasn't been organised, the table hasn't been set. I mean, you know, it's just, it's a rough guideline.
Yes.
You know, like 30 minutes late is on time. And I actually grew up very much in a family like that, where arriving on time wasn't a thing. But I have learned that for many people, it really is a thing. And I have adapted my way of being to be respectful and to meet the needs of those for whom it is important.
And that's the critical piece here. In all of this, it's about, understanding who you are and then understanding how do we get the best out of the situation. What do I need to do? What's the agility do I need to get the best out of that other person, that team, that company, that whatever. So this is really useful if you're moving to different countries, if it's for the sales process, and all of these combined. If you're talking to somebody who is very much driven by, I was thinking about, you know, how you hand over a business card versus not. Even those small things can make a difference. So what's our next one?
Communication, which is just a brilliant segue from there, because we look at the polarities of direct and indirect.
Yeah.
So do you communicate directly and in the open? You know, it is true to myself to be completely frank and this is what I'm saying. Or do you feel it's more appropriate to use an indirect third-person form of communication? So I might be wanting to say something very blunt, but I feel if I use the words that are in my head, it's going to damage the relationship. So I will find a different way of saying it, or maybe a different person to pass on that message if I feel it would be better received. You know, so direct communication is openly confronting issues. This is what's going on. This is where we're at. What are we going to do about it? This is my opinion. Whereas on the other side, it's maybe more about not on what is said, but on how it's said. So how do we address difficult issues, but in an indirect way, so that we're bringing people along and maybe not building barriers, which can sometimes also cause confusion because we're saying it in such a supposedly tactful and indirect way that people walk away and have no idea actually where they stand or what was meant by it.
Yeah.
So again, it's how do we walk along these polarities, where an understanding that some people can read between the lines. They get that in communication. Other people need things to be said as it is. It's black and white. Just give it to me. And how do we bring those together?
We talk a lot about having conversations that matter.
Yes.
And that could be misconstrued that, well, we just need to go out there and have conversations.
No.
But those conversations still have to have all of these considerations built into them.
Yep.
And my personality type, for example, I can be a little bit blunt at times. I know that. And I will spend probably my entire life trying to make sure I can temper that when need be.
Well, like me, I can be very velvety. I mean,
you are one of those rare people that actually can be blunt and people say thank you. I'm one of those people who's blunt and they go, gosh, he's a bitch, right? You've got one of those little magical bits, but which I don't get. So I have to work really hard on that. But it is, again, it's constantly looking at how do we not... And by using ourselves as examples here, it shows you that we're all different. We do this well. We love communicating with people. We love to get the best out of people. We just do it differently.
Yeah, and lean on each other as well, because sometimes things need to be a little bit more blunt. And it's like, Cass...
Yep.
Come and have this conversation.
How can I shorten that sentence so we get to the point?
Yes, yeah.
I used to run some workshops with a co-facilitator who used to do it in the different language. We'd start in English, and it used to amuse me no end. I'd sit there and I'd explain something. I would take 10 words to explain it in English.
And 5 minutes later...
No, 15 minutes later, all right? I would look at her and go, did we just say the same thing? She'd go, yeah, okay. And sometimes it's the other way around.
Exactly.
And again, that's cultural because of completely different backgrounds, hence the language differences, and et cetera. So it's very amazing. Accountability is the 11th dimension. We look at it from community and individual. So the continuum is, are we more focused on the community for accountability or individual accountability? And I always find this one really interesting around when we talk about the 3 colours of worldview. So if I'm more of an innocent guilt culture, I may be more individual. If I come from a more power-feel or honest shame, it will definitely be more about community.
Oh gosh, and I saw that so beautifully on one of the projects I was on, because the observation system really was epically failing. And it was through consultation and conversation, because they just kept getting bigger prizes and more expensive prizes, but it was all individualistic. And after consultation and discussion around, and I don't advocate bonuses and that kind of stuff for safety at all.
No.
However, this was many years ago, but it was a lovely example of this.
No.
Because the reward wasn't team-based, they didn't want it. Nobody actually wanted to win the prize because they would then stand out as almost being selfish or not being a part of the team, and it was things that they could not share. So when it changed to community-based and team-based, they suddenly had a whole different conversation and were getting far more valuable input and suggestions on how to improve the working environment, because the community or the team could then share in the reward.
Exactly. I think that just described it really beautifully. So, I mean, we often talk about, so how do we make people more accountable? Well, maybe it's about understanding some of the cultural diversity here and know, well, where are we working? So if I'm an innocent guilt-based organisation working in an honest shame culture or community, which is what you've just described, then how do we need to shift this so that we get the best for both worlds?
Yeah.
Because actually from the innocent guilt, which tends to be a little bit more of an individualistic approach to the world, not completely, of course, because family and communities and whatever is important. But there's a bigger sense of I and right and wrong.
Yes.
Right? You must do this or not do that. Whereas a community-based culture is about what brings honour to the community or what brings shame to the community. So in a very strong honour, shame community, they don't even understand this concept of innocent and guilt.
Yeah.
What do you mean there's a right and a wrong? It's got nothing to do with right and wrong. It's about how does the community cope with this?
Yes.
What does the community need to do to grow and to evolve and deal with that individual that might have done something but is more community-based? So accountability is very interesting.
It is.
We see lots of articles and whatever, on LinkedIn or wherever, whatever, leadership programs, accountability, this, that and the other. But it looks at it from a very innocent guilt perspective. I'm going to say Western world mostly, right? Because our judicial systems are that way. We're brought up that way.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, all communities have all of these viewpoints, but some will be more preferential than others.
Exactly. Some will be at a different stage along the line.
Yeah. So community-based focus is more about we, and we talk a lot about that from a how do we have conversational intelligence? We try to move, how do we move from I to we? And it's important, but it's also important to understand the individual might be a little bit more oriented and they will find it difficult to move to the we, because they might be more solution-focused rather than community-focused. So that accountability is very interesting. So with an individual, being unique and standing out and being original is really encouraged in that individual world. In the community world, it's conforming to the group expectations is encouraged. And again, all through these explainers, we're talking about the extremes.
Yes, because there's a lot in the middle.
And so lucky last.
The 12th dimension is on status. So is status ascribed or is it achieved? And the question is one's status and position earned through individual effort or acquired due to one's age or family or connections? And one of the examples is, are you, if we think of kings and queens and royalty and all of that, are you automatically going to be the next person in power? Or, on the other side, are you going to be brought into power because you have achieved certain accolades, you've been voted in, on those kind of extremes? So on the ascribed side, it's very much a connection to who you are. So where have you come from? What is your background? What is your status in the community? Role and rank is very important. On the achieved side, it is about what you are and what you have achieved. It doesn't matter where you've come from, but you can go out and be the first person in your family to get a degree. You can be in a position of power, as in you might be a manager or a leader, but on the achieved side, you will be possibly more willing to get your hands dirty with your team if stuff needs to be done. On the ascribed side, it may be, I've been promoted into a management role, I am therefore, there are certain things I do and I don't do. The team do the work, I do the overseeing, but I won't come and particularly get my hands dirty. So the expectation is, with people that have achievement, is that status is then ascribed to them because of what they have achieved. On the other side, its status is given to me because of where I've come from and what title I have.
And again, you'll see that in different communities and cultures around the world. Some people are born into a world, they don't even want to be born into it, but they've got little choice. And I'm thinking now royalty, and I'm thinking of the British royalty at the moment. All of those people are there because they were born into it.
Yep.
That's got nothing to do whether we think that they're good or indifferent or bad or at what they do. They are definitely born into that position. And we see that in cultures all over the world. And then there'll be other people who it's really difficult for them to come out because of the classes and the race, classes within communities or within cultures. So the point of this whole episode has been really to say that these dimensions are there as guides. They do make up the total of the cultural influences that apply to an individual's life, together with personality, traits and factors that help inform the way that we think, feel, speak and act. So as we get to know ourselves, it also helps us to get to know others. So we'd be really interested to hear about which side of those polarities, and there's a lot there, so you might need to go to the show notes to see them, because we'll put the primary bits of information in there. How comfortable versus uncomfortable were with each end of the polarities. And of course, do reach out, and if you want to learn more about how to work with others who are different, who have different cultural dimensions to you, then just send us an email at hello@safetycollaborations.com, or go to the website and send us a note that way. In our next episode, we might share some examples of how this actually looks in practice. So we might go to another episode with this 3-part series on bridging cultures for safety. So in summary,
understanding that even though we see the world through different cultural lenses, it does not mean that we can't work in harmony together. We may need to be open to having conversations that matter and learning to do what I love to call a cultural dance together.
absolutely.
Reach out to us to discuss how to bridge your cultures for safer operations and to build on your culture of care.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today. It is always lovely to have conversations that matter. And as you'll probably notice, this is something we are very passionate about and can talk a lot on. Our website has a lot of information. You'll find the show notes for this episode there. Leave us a message on the chat section. Follow us on LinkedIn, Safety Collaborations, Karen Ovari and me, Nuala Gage. And as always, sharing is caring. Follow us on your favourite podcast platform. Leave us a review. It really helps other people to find the information that may help them have better conversations and safer operations. And until next week, stay safe and stay well.